This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. The roads were pitch black, winding through dense forest with hardly another vehicle in sight. My high beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. We had the radio on low, some classic rock station fading in and out as we lost signal in the boonies. I was zoning out a bit, the monotony of driving getting to me after hours on the road. My eyes were starting to feel heavy, and I was considering asking Jake to take over for a bit. That's when I saw it. Just at the edge of my headlights, a creature darted across the road. At first I thought it was a dog or coyote, but as it turned to look at us, I realized this was no normal animal. It was about the size of a pit bull, but with a face like a lion, broad snout, glowing eyes, and what looked like a mane. But the most unsettling part was its expression. It wasn't scared or startled like most animals caught in headlights. It looked menacing, aggressive, like it was challenging us. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things from fatigue. But when I looked again, it was still there for a split second before disappearing into the woods. My heart was racing and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. "Hey, did you guys see that?" I asked, glancing at Jake. He looked at me quizzically. "See what?" "That thing, that animal that just ran across the road." Jake shook his head. "Nah, man, I didn't see anything." "You sure you're not just tired? Want me to drive for a bit?" I looked in the rearview mirror at the two guys in back. They both shrugged, clearly having no idea what I was talking about. "No, I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Must have just been a coyote or something. But I knew it wasn't a coyote, or any other animal I'd ever seen before. The image of that creature was burned into my mind, its lion-like face, its predatory stance, those glowing eyes boring into me. I tried to shake it off, tell myself I was just overtired and seeing things. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. The rest of the drive passed uneventfully, but I couldn't stop thinking about that creature. When we finally got to the motel, I was wired despite my exhaustion. While the other guys crashed, I sat up researching cryptids and mysterious creatures of Arkansas. Nothing I found quite matched what I'd seen. I started calling it my personal chupacabra. Not because I thought it actually was the legendary goatsucker, but because I needed some way to categorize this unidentifiable beast in my mind. Plus, like the chupacabra, no one else had seen it. It was my own private monster. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly scanning the roadsides as we drove, hoping for another glimpse. Part of me was desperate to prove I wasn't crazy, to have someone else witness it. But another part of me was terrified of seeing it again, especially up close. I considered telling the guys about what I'd really seen that night, but I knew they'd just think I was losing it. So I kept it to myself, letting it gnaw at me as we finished up the job and headed home. Back in my own bed that weekend, I thought the whole thing would fade like a bad dream. But I found myself jolting awake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure I'd heard scratching at my window. Of course, there was never anything there when I looked. I tried to put it out of my mind and get back to normal life, but that creature haunted me. I'd catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when I turned my head. I'd wake up in a cold sweat from nightmares of being chased through dark woods by a snarling, maned beast. It got to the point where I was afraid to drive at night. I'd make excuses to get out of late shifts or evening plans. When I did have to be on the road after dark, I'd white-knuckle the steering wheel the whole time, eyes darting to every shadow and movement along the shoulder. About a month after the incident, I was heading home from a friend's place around midnight. I was on edge as usual, but trying to stay calm. That's when my headlights caught something on the side of the road up ahead. My blood ran cold as I recognized that distinctive silhouette. It was standing perfectly still, staring directly at my approaching car. As I got closer, I could make out more details: the broad feline face, the shaggy mane, the muscular build. But this time, I also noticed something I hadn't before. It seemed to be covered in some kind of scales or armor plating. My instincts screamed at me to floor it and speed past, but some morbid curiosity made me slow down instead. I needed a better look, needed to confirm what I was seeing was real. As I crawled past at about 15 feet up, the creature's eyes locked onto mine. They glowed an eerie yellow-green in my headlights. Its lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. A low growl emanated from its throat, so deep I could feel it rumbling in my chest. I was frozen in terror, unable to look away or hit the gas. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, we stared each other down. Then, quick as lightning, it lunged at my car. I yelped and stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as I peeled away. In my mirror, I saw the creature give chase for a few hundred feet before veering off into the woods. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I didn't slow down until I hit the city limits, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit. When I finally made it home, I collapsed on my couch in a cold sweat. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no denying it now. This thing was real, and it seemed to be fixated on me for some reason. I barely slept that night, jumping at every little sound. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours online, desperately searching for any information on what this creature could be. I even reached out to some cryptozoology forums, but most people there thought I was making it up or mistaken. As the days passed with no further sightings, I started to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind after all. But then I noticed something disturbing: claw marks on the side of my car, right where the creature had lunged at me that night. 3 deep gouges in the metal, like nothing any normal animal could make. I knew then that this was far from over. Whatever this thing was, it was real, it was dangerous, and for some reason, it had chosen me as its target. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of what might be lurking just out of sight. To this day, I haven't seen the creature again, but I know it's out there, waiting. Sometimes at night I swear I can hear that low, rumbling growl outside my window. I've thought about moving, but somehow I know it would find me wherever I went. So I stay and I wait, wondering when my personal chupacabra will make its next appearance. All I know is that when it does, I'll be ready, because next time I'm not letting it get away without answers. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something odd. The dogs in the kennel started going crazy, barking and howling like they'd seen a ghost. I tried to calm them down, but they were inconsolable. That's when I saw it, a strange, pulsing light coming from deep within the forest. At first, I thought it might be a crashed aircraft. We were used to all sorts of military exercises in the area, so it wasn't completely out of the ordinary. But as I got closer, I realized this was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The light was moving between the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist in impossible ways. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. I radioed back to base, reporting what I was seeing, but the response I got was skeptical at best. Probably just poachers with flashlights, they said. But I knew this was different. The light was too bright, too otherworldly to be anything man-made. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the air around me seemed to change. It became thick and heavy, like walking through invisible syrup. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel a strange vibration in my chest, almost like a silent bass drum pounding away. That's when I saw it. a massive triangular object hovering just above the tree line. It was enormous, easily the size of a football field, and it was completely silent. The surface was a dark, metallic color, but it seemed to shimmer and shift as if it wasn't quite solid. The most striking feature was the symbols etched into its surface. They weren't like any language I'd ever seen, more like complex geometric patterns that seemed to move and change as I watched them. It was hypnotic, and for a moment I forgot to be afraid. The object was emitting a soft, pulsing light from its underside, casting an eerie glow on the forest below. As I watched, transfixed, it began to move. But it didn't move like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It didn't so much fly as it seemed to bend the space around it, shifting position instantaneously without any apparent acceleration. I fumbled for my radio, trying to report what I was seeing, but it was dead. Not just out of battery, but completely fried. The same went for my flashlight and watch. It was as if all electronics in the vicinity had been completely neutralized. As I stood there, a mixture of awe and terror washing over me, the object suddenly came to a stop directly overhead. The vibration in my chest intensified, and I could feel a pressure building in my head, like my skull was being squeezed in a vice. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot down from the craft, enveloping me completely. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think clearly. It was like every cell in my body was being examined, catalogued, and rearranged. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that beam of light. It could have been seconds, or it could have been hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning. When it finally released me, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The craft began to move again, this time ascending rapidly into the night sky. As it rose, it seemed to fold in on itself, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a pinprick of light among the stars. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I lay there on the forest floor for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My mind was reeling, unable to reconcile what I'd seen with my understanding of reality. When I finally managed to stumble back to base, I was a mess, covered in dirt, twigs in my hair, and babbling about lights in the sky. My superiors were skeptical, to say the least. They suggested I might have been drinking on duty, or perhaps I'd had some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But I knew what I'd seen was real. Over the next few days, reports started trickling in from other personnel on the base, as well as civilians in the surrounding area. They'd all seen strange lights in the sky, heard unusual noises, or experienced unexplained equipment failures. It was clear that something extraordinary had happened that night. The official investigation was a joke. They claimed it was all a misidentification of a lighthouse beam, or perhaps some sort of atmospheric phenomenon. But those of us who were there that night knew the truth. We'd seen something that defied explanation, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. In the years since that night, I've struggled to make sense of what happened. I've pored over books on physics, astronomy, and even fringe theories about extraterrestrial life. I've attended UFO conferences and spoken with other witnesses of similar events. But nothing has ever fully explained what I saw in Rendlesham Forest. The experience changed me profoundly. I left the military soon after, unable to continue serving in a system that seemed determined to cover up the truth. I've spent countless nights staring up at the stars, wondering if they're out there watching us, studying us, perhaps preparing for some future contact. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of that silent triangular craft hovering above me, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. I can still feel the vibration in my chest, still see those strange, shifting symbols etched into its surface. I know many people don't believe me. Hell, there are times I hardly believe it myself. But I know what I saw that night in Rendlesham Forest. I know that there are things in this universe far beyond our current understanding. And I know that someday, somehow, the truth will come out. Until then, I'll keep watching the skies, waiting for the day when that strange triangular craft returns, because deep down, I know it's not a question of if, but when. And when it does come back, I hope we'll be ready for it. The incident at Rendlesham Forest may have faded from the public consciousness, dismissed as just another UFO hoax or misidentification. But for those of us who were there, who saw that impossible craft with our own eyes, it remains a pivotal moment in our lives, a moment when the veil of reality was pulled back, just for an instant, revealing a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we could have ever imagined. As I sit here, typing out this account, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see that familiar triangular shape silhouetted against the night sky. And part of me hopes I will. Because as terrifying as that night was, it was also the most incredible experience of my life. It opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before, and it left me with a sense of wonder that has never faded. So if you're reading this, and you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if we're alone in the universe, let me assure you, we're not. There are things out there beyond our wildest dreams. I've seen them with my own eyes, and someday, maybe you will too. Until then, keep watching the skies, because you never know when something extraordinary might happen, just like it did to me on that cold December night in Rendlesham Forest. I was never much of a believer in UFOs or anything like that. Sure, I enjoyed sci-fi movies as much as the next guy, but I always chalked up alien sightings to overactive imaginations or people mistaking normal aircraft for something more exotic. That all changed last summer during what was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip with my 2 kids in the Ozarks. It was late August, and I had decided to take my 12-year-old son Jason and 10-year-old daughter Emily on one last adventure before school started up again. We rented this cozy little cabin nestled in the mountains, miles away from the nearest town. The kids were excited about roasting marshmallows, telling spooky stories, and maybe doing some stargazing away from all the light pollution of the city. The first couple days were great. We went hiking, fished in a nearby stream, and just enjoyed being out in nature together. On our 3rd night there, we decided to stay up late to try and spot some shooting stars. It was a crystal clear night, perfect for stargazing. We laid out some blankets in a small clearing near the cabin and settled in, pointing out constellations to each other. It must have been close to midnight when Jason suddenly sat up and pointed at something in the sky. "Dad, look, I think I see a satellite." I glanced to where he was pointing and saw a faint pinprick of light slowly moving across the star field. "Good eye, buddy," I said. "That's probably the International Space Station." We watched it for a few moments, and I was about to suggest we head inside when Emily piped up. "Wait a second. That's not a satellite. Look how it's moving." I focused back on the light, and my heart skipped a beat. The steady, predictable motion I'd initially seen was gone. Now the object was darting back and forth in quick, jerky movements that no satellite or conventional aircraft could possibly make. It would zip in one direction for a few seconds, then abruptly change course at impossible angles. "What the heck?" I muttered, sitting up straighter. The kids were transfixed, their eyes wide as they tracked the erratic dance of light above us. "Is it a drone, maybe?" Jason asked, but I shook my head. We were miles from anywhere, and even the most advanced consumer drones couldn't move like that. Plus, this thing seemed to be incredibly high up, much higher than any drone could reach. For several minutes, we watched in awe as the object continued its bizarre acrobatics. Sometimes it would hover motionless for a few seconds before suddenly shooting off in a new direction. Other times, it would trace tight circles or figure eights in the sky. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. In all my life, I had never seen anything move like this. It defied the laws of physics as I understood them, Suddenly, the light froze in place, hanging motionless directly above a nearby ridgeline. "Look, it stopped," Emily whispered urgently, pointing. The object hovered there, a brilliant pinprick of white light against the backdrop of stars. As we stared, slack-jawed, it seemed to slowly grow larger and brighter. Was it coming closer? A heavy feeling of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Some primal part of my brain was screaming at me to grab the kids and run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The light continued to expand, taking on a more defined circular shape. It had to be massive, far larger than any aircraft I'd ever seen. The entire clearing was bathed in an eerie glow as waves of light pulsed outward from the object. Emily whimpered and pressed closer to my side. I wrapped an arm around her protectively, my own heart pounding. Jason had gone completely still, his eyes huge as he gaped at the impossible sight above us. Just when I thought the light couldn't get any brighter, it suddenly flared with blinding intensity. I threw an arm up to shield my eyes, spots dancing in my vision. When I lowered my arm a few seconds later, the object was gone, vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. The clearing was once again dark, lit only by the faint glow of starlight. For a long moment none of us spoke. I could hear the ragged sound of my own breathing, unnaturally loud in the silence. Finally, Jason broke the spell. "Dad?" he said in a shaky voice. "What was that?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I possibly explain what we'd just witnessed? I don't know, buddy," I admitted. Emily was trembling against me. "Was it aliens?" she asked in a small voice. "No, of course not," I said quickly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It must have been, I don't know, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, or maybe a military test of some new aircraft." Even as I said it, I knew how weak those explanations sounded. Nothing in my experience could account for what we'd seen tonight. "Let's head inside," I said, getting to my feet and helping the kids up. "It's late. We should try to get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily that night. We left a light on in the cabin, and the kids insisted on all piling into my bed. As I lay there in the dark, listening to their steady breathing, my mind raced. What had we seen out there? Was it truly something otherworldly, or was there a rational explanation I was overlooking? Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a shared hallucination or trick of the light. But I knew deep down that wasn't the case. It had been all too real. The rest of our trip passed in a kind of daze. We went through the motions of our planned activities, but our hearts weren't in it. There was a sense of tension, of waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No more strange lights appeared in the sky. When we got home, I spent hours online, searching for any reports of similar sightings in the area. I found a few vague stories of strange lights in the Ozarks over the years, but nothing that matched the incredible display we'd witnessed. It's been months now, and I still don't have any answers. The kids don't talk about it much, but I can tell it's always there in the back of their minds. Sometimes I'll catch Jason staring up at the night sky with a look of mingled fear and fascination. As for me, I find my certainty about the world has been shaken. If what we saw that night was real, and I'm convinced it was, then there are things out there beyond our current understanding, things that defy explanation. I don't know if we'll ever learn the truth about that strange, dancing light in the mountains, but I do know that I'll never look at the night sky quite the same way again, and a part of me will always be waiting, wondering if someday we'll see those lights return. Suddenly, something caught my eye that made me stop dead in my tracks. A massive dark shape was moving slowly across the starry expanse above me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I focused on it, I realized with growing unease that this was very real. The object was enormous, far larger than any aircraft I'd ever seen. It had a distinct triangular shape with smooth edges, like an enormous flying wedge gliding silently through the night. The thing that struck me most was how utterly black it was, blacker than the night sky around it, so black that it completely blotted out the stars as it passed in front of them. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart pounding as I watched this impossible object continue its slow, silent journey across the heavens. It was moving steadily to the northwest, maintaining a perfectly straight course. There was no sound at all, not even the faintest hum or whisper that you'd expect from something that massive moving through the air. As I followed its path with my eyes, I noticed 3 dim reddish lights at each corner of the triangle. They didn't flash or blink, just glowed with a dull, steady light. The lights were tiny compared to the overall size of the craft. I've lived near a military base for years and I'm very familiar with all kinds of aircraft. I've seen fighter jets, cargo planes, helicopters, you name it. But this was something entirely different. My mind raced as I tried to come up with some rational explanation, but I knew deep in my bones that this was not of human origin. The silence was the most unnerving part. Something that big should have been roaring through the sky, but there wasn't even the faintest whisper of sound. Just that massive black shape sliding effortlessly through the night like a hole cut out of reality itself. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to capture some evidence of what I was seeing, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. By the time I managed to open the camera app, the object had moved beyond my line of sight, obscured by the trees lining the road. I sprinted down the road trying to get to a clearing where I could see it again. My heart was racing, and I could hear my ragged breathing echoing in the still night air. I emerged into an open field and scanned the northwestern sky frantically. There, I caught a glimpse of it again, now much further away. It was just barely visible, a black void against the starry backdrop. I raised my phone and tried to steady my hands enough to take a photo, but it was too far away now. The camera couldn't pick up anything in the darkness. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where I'd last seen it until my eyes ached, but it never reappeared. Eventually I realized I was shivering, the warm summer night suddenly feeling ice cold. In a daze I made my way home. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. I knew what I'd seen was real, but I also knew that no one would believe me without proof, and I had nothing but my own rattled memories to go on. Over the next few days I scoured local news and social media, desperate to find out if anyone else had seen it. But there was nothing. No reports, no sightings, nothing at all out of the ordinary. I started to question my own sanity. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or was my mind playing elaborate tricks on me? But every time I closed my eyes, I could see that massive black triangle sliding silently across the star-filled sky. The image was burned into my brain. I knew with absolute certainty that it had been real. I've always been a rational, level-headed person. I'm not the type to believe in conspiracy theories or jump to wild conclusions, but that night shook me to my core. It forced me to confront the fact that there are things in this universe far beyond our current understanding. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself constantly scanning the night sky, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious craft. But I never saw it again. Life went on as normal, but I was changed. That brief encounter left me with a profound sense of how little we truly know about the world around us. I still go for walks on summer nights, but now there's always a hint of anticipation mixed with the peacefulness. Part of me hopes to see it again, to confirm that it wasn't just a bizarre one-time occurrence, but another part of me dreads the possibility, fearing what it might mean for our understanding of reality. I've struggled with whether or not to share this experience. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I do. If someone had told me this story before that night, I probably would have dismissed it as the ravings of an attention seeker or someone who'd had too much to drink. But I know what I saw. It was as real as the ground beneath my feet. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm simply sharing my experience in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has seen something similar, that I'm not alone in carrying this burden of knowledge. To this day, I have no explanation for what I witnessed that summer night in Sweden. It defies everything I thought I knew about aviation and physics. All I know is that it was real, it was massive, and it was utterly silent. And somewhere out there, beyond our understanding, it still exists. The experience has left me with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity that I can't shake. I find myself looking at the world differently now, always wondering what other mysteries might be hiding just beyond our perception. That massive black triangle opened my eyes to possibilities I never would have considered before. I still live near the military base, and I still see all kinds of aircraft on a regular basis. But now, every time I hear a plane overhead or see lights in the night sky, there's a moment of anticipation, a split second where I wonder if this time it might be something different. I don't know if I'll ever see anything like it again. Part of me hopes I do. I'll never forget that morning when I was 4 years old. It's one of those childhood memories that stays with you, vivid and strange, defying explanation even decades later. I was always an early riser as a kid, much to my parents' chagrin. That day, I woke up just as the first hints of dawn were creeping over the hills behind our house. The world had that hushed, ethereal quality it gets in those liminal moments between night and day. My bedroom was on the second floor, with a big picture window that looked out over our backyard and the wooded hills beyond. I loved sitting by that window, imagining all sorts of fantastical creatures lurking in the misty forests. That morning I crawled out of bed and went straight to the window, rubbing sleep from my eyes. The grass was heavy with dew, and wisps of fog clung to the tree line. Everything was still and quiet. And then I saw it. At first it was just a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. I pressed my face against the cool glass, straining to see. There, a sinuous shape weaving between the trees, climbing the hill with impossible speed and grace. It was massive, easily the size of a school bus, but moved with fluid agility. The weak morning light glinted off rows of iridescent purple scales. I caught glimpses of membranous wings folded tight against its body, a whip-like tail, wickedly curved claws digging into the earth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to shout, to alert my parents, but I was frozen in place, afraid that any movement would break the spell and make the creature disappear. In a matter of seconds, it had crested the hill and vanished from sight. I stayed glued to the window, waiting to see if it would reappear, my breath fogging the glass. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway. She poked her head in, frowning when she saw me out of bed. "What are you doing up already, sweetie? It's not even 6 a.m. I turned to her, eyes wide. "Mommy, I saw a dragon." She sighed, clearly not in the mood for flights of fancy so early. "Of course you did, honey. Come on, back to bed. It's too early to be up." "But I really did see one. It was huge and purple and climbing the hill super fast." My mother just shook her head, gently but firmly guiding me back to bed. "It was just a dream, sweetie. Dragons aren't real. Now try to get a little more sleep, okay?" I let her tuck me in, but I knew with absolute certainty that what I'd seen was real. How could it have been a dream when I was wide awake, standing at the window? The memory was so clear, so detailed. I could still see those gleaming scales, still feel the awe and wonder that had coursed through me. As I grew older, I clung to that memory. Even as I learned that dragons were mythical creatures, even as adults patronizingly explained that I must have dreamed it or let my imagination run wild, I couldn't shake the conviction that I had witnessed something extraordinary that morning. I became obsessed with dragons, devouring every book and movie I could find on the subject. I drew pictures of what I'd seen, trying to capture every detail before it faded. My parents indulged my fascination at first, but as the years went by, their patience wore thin. "Don't you think you're a little old for dragons?" my father would say when he caught me poring over some fantasy novel. My mother was gentler, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Honey, it's wonderful to have an imagination, but you need to be able to separate fantasy from reality." But how could I explain that this wasn't about fantasy for me? That somewhere deep in my bones, I knew what I had seen was real? As a teenager, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been some kind of large bird, distorted by the early morning light and fog, or a hang glider, though that didn't explain the scales or the way it moved. I researched local wildlife, wondering if there was some mundane explanation I was missing. Nothing fit. Nothing came close to explaining what I had witnessed. In college, I took a folklore class, hoping to gain some insight. We studied dragon myths from cultures around the world. I was fascinated by the similarities in descriptions across vastly different societies. How had so many isolated cultures come up with such similar ideas of these creatures? Was there some kernel of truth buried in the legends? I wrote my final paper on modern dragon sightings, combing through accounts of people who claimed to have seen these creatures in recent times. Most were easily dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few rang true in a way I couldn't explain. There was an old woman in Wales who described seeing a creature remarkably similar to what I had witnessed, right down to the purple scales. A group of hikers in the Appalachians who all swore they saw a massive serpentine shape soaring between mountain peaks. A child in Japan who drew picture after picture of a long, sinuous dragon he insisted lived in the lake near his home. Were we all delusional? Suffering from some shared psychological quirk that made us see dragons where none existed? Or was there something more to it? I graduated and got a job, but I never stopped searching for answers. I joined online communities dedicated to cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. I went on camping trips to areas with reported sightings, spending nights staring at the sky and hills, hoping for a glimpse of something extraordinary. My friends and family grew increasingly concerned about my obsession. They tried to set me up on dates, encourage other hobbies, anything to get my mind off dragons. I went along with it to appease them, but my heart wasn't in it. How could I focus on mundane things when I knew there were wonders hiding just out of sight? Years passed. I had almost given up hope of ever seeing another dragon or finding someone who truly believed me. And then, on a crisp autumn morning, much like the one from my childhood, everything changed. I was hiking alone in a remote area of national forest, enjoying the solitude and vibrant fall colors. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I froze. There, not 30 feet away, was a creature that could only be described as a dragon. Smaller than the one from my childhood, maybe the size of a horse, but unmistakable. Scales the color of burnished copper. Leathery wings folded against its sides, a long serpentine neck topped by a wedge-shaped head. It was drinking from a stream, and at my sudden appearance, its head snapped up. We locked eyes, and I felt a jolt of recognition. There was ancient intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that went beyond anything I'd seen in an animal before. For a breathless moment, we stared at each other. Then, with a grace that belied its size, the dragon unfurled its wings and launched into the air. I caught a glimpse of it sailing over the treetops before it vanished from sight. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down my face, tears of joy, of vindication, of sheer awe at what I had witnessed. I wanted to shout it from the mountaintops. I wanted to call everyone I knew and tell them they were wrong, that dragons were real, that I wasn't crazy. But as the initial shock wore off, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving myself right. This was about protecting something magical, something that clearly didn't want to be found by the wider world. How long had dragons managed to survive, hidden on the fringes of our reality. What would happen if their existence became common knowledge? I thought of poachers, of scientists wanting to study them, of the loss of habitat they'd face as humans pushed ever further into wild spaces. No, I realized, this wasn't a secret I could share. This was a gift, a glimpse behind the veil at the wonders still lurking in the world's wild places. I never told anyone about that second sighting. But knowing it happened, knowing I wasn't alone in what I'd seen, brought me a peace I hadn't felt since that morning as a child. I still go hiking as often as I can, my eyes always scanning the skies and forests. I haven't seen another dragon since that day, but now, when I look at the world around me, I see it with new eyes. Every shadow holds the possibility of magic. Every unexplored corner of wilderness whispers of secrets waiting to be discovered. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist hangs low in the valleys, I could swear I hear the distant beat of leathery wings. We were all laughing and joking around, still riding the high of the weekend finally arriving. Jake was in the passenger seat next to me, while Mia and Tom were squeezed in the back. The streets were practically deserted at this hour, with most of the houses dark except for a porch light here and there. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The rustling leaves, chirping crickets, and our own voices were the only sounds breaking the nighttime silence. Little did I know that serenity was about to be shattered in the most surreal way imaginable. As we approached the intersection of elm and oak, I noticed something odd in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just a weird reflection from a streetlight or something, but when I turned to look, my breath caught in my throat. There, hovering about a foot above the asphalt, was a glowing green sphere about the size of a basketball. It seemed to be pulsing slightly, casting an eerie emerald light on the surrounding pavement. "Holy shit, do you guys see that?" I blurted out, slowing the car to a crawl. "What the?" Jake trailed off, leaning forward in his seat to get a better look. I heard gasps from Mia and Tom in the back seat as they spotted it too. We all stared in stunned silence as I brought the car to a complete stop about 20 feet from the object. For a few seconds, the sphere just hovered there, gently bobbing up and down. Then, without warning, it started to grow. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a balloon inflating, except 1,000 times creepier. In the span of maybe 5 seconds, that basketball-sized orb expanded until it was roughly the size of a car. The green light it emitted grew brighter too, bathing the entire street in its alien glow. "What the fuck is happening?" Mia whispered from the back seat, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. We were frozen, unable to look away from the impossible sight before us. The expanded sphere pulsed a few more times, so bright now that I had to squint. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. No flash, no sound, nothing. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone without a trace. For a long moment, we all just sat there in shocked silence. The sudden darkness seemed oppressive after the intense green glow. I blinked hard, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Tell me you all saw that," Tom finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded numbly, still staring at the now empty stretch of road where the sphere had been. Should we get out and look?" Jake asked hesitantly. Part of me wanted to floor it and get the hell out of there. But curiosity won out. Slowly, cautiously, we exited the car. The night air felt cooler than before, and goosebumps rose on my arms. We approached the spot where the sphere had appeared, our footsteps seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet night. There was nothing there, no scorch marks, no residue, not a single sign that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. "This is insane," Mia muttered, running her hand through her hair. "What the hell did we just see?" We spent the next 20 minutes or so examining every inch of that stretch of road, looking for any clue or explanation, but there was nothing. It was as if the whole thing had been some kind of shared hallucination. Finally, we piled back into my car, all of us visibly shaken. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we had witnessed. Over the next few days, we talked about it constantly, trying to make sense of what happened. We scoured the internet for similar stories, reached out to local astronomers and physicists, even considered reporting it to the authorities. But we found no satisfying explanations. The few people we told either didn't believe us or suggested we had seen some kind of experimental aircraft or elaborate prank. But we know what we saw. That pulsing green sphere was like nothing that exists in our normal understanding of the world. It's been 3 months since that night, and I still get chills every time I drive past that intersection. Sometimes I find myself slowing down, half expecting to see that eerie green glow again. But the streets remain stubbornly normal, giving no hint of the inexplicable event we witnessed. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stuff. UFOs, ghosts, cryptids. I never put much stock in any of it. But after what I saw that night, I can't help but wonder what other impossible things might be out there, just waiting to be discovered. Jake, Mia, Tom, and I have grown closer because of our shared experience. It's like we're members of some exclusive club now, bonded by a secret that few would understand or believe. We still talk about it sometimes, tossing around theories and speculating about what it could have been. Was it extraterrestrial? Some kind of interdimensional phenomenon? A glitch in the fabric of reality itself? We'll probably never know for sure. But one thing's certain. None of us will ever forget that night when the impossible became real, if only for a few breathtaking moments. I've started carrying a camera in my car just in case. Part of me hopes I'll never see anything like that sphere again. But another part kind of hopes I do. Because now I know that the world is stranger and more mysterious than I ever imagined. And who knows what other wonders or terrors might be lurking just beyond the veil of our everyday reality. So if you're ever driving through a quiet suburb late at night and see something that defies explanation, don't just write it off. You might just be witnessing a moment when the extraordinary breaks through into our ordinary world. And trust me, it's an experience that will change you forever. I still can't shake the feeling that the green sphere was just the beginning of something bigger, like it was a test, or a probe, or a glimpse of something vast and incomprehensible. Sometimes I catch myself staring up at the night sky, wondering if whoever or whatever was behind that sphere is up there, watching and waiting. Will they return? Will we see more unexplained phenomena? Or was this a once-in-a-lifetime glimpse into the unknown? I don't have the answers, but I do know that I'll never look at the world quite the same way again. Because now I know that reality is far more complex and mysterious than we can possibly imagine. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the stars are bright, I swear I can see a faint green glow on the horizon. It's probably just my imagination. Probably. But maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that there are still wonders in this world waiting to be discovered. And who knows? Maybe next time, that impossible green sphere won't disappear. Maybe next time it'll be the beginning of something far beyond our wildest dreams or our darkest nightmares. Our group of 12 students, plus our professor Dr. Chen, had traveled to a remote mountain village to help build a new schoolhouse. The locals were incredibly welcoming, but accommodations were sparse. We ended up staying in an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Not exactly the Ritz, but it had a roof and running water, so we were grateful. The first few days went by in a blur of manual labor and bonding with the villagers. By nightfall, we'd collapse into our sleeping bags, exhausted but fulfilled. It wasn't until our fourth night there that things took a turn for the bizarre. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I fumbled for my flashlight, I noticed a faint glow coming from down the hall. Curious, I crept out of the makeshift dorm room where we all slept and followed the light to its source, the old factory cafeteria. The cafeteria was a big open room, probably 40 feet square, with a few old tables still scattered about. What I saw when I peered inside made my blood run cold. There, hovering about shoulder height, were 9 glowing squares of light. Each one was maybe a foot across and emitted a pale bluish-white radiance. But here's the really freaky part. They were moving. Rotating slowly in a clockwise direction, the squares drifted across the walls and floor in perfect formation. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. There were no windows in that room, no projectors or any other light source I could see. These things seemed to be floating in mid-air, defying all logic. My first instinct was to run, get the others, but I was mesmerized. I must have watched those ethereal squares dance across the room for a good 5 minutes before I snapped out of it. Heart pounding, I sprinted back to wake up Dr. Chen and my classmates. In retrospect, maybe I should have tried to document it somehow. Snap a picture or grab my phone to record video. But in that moment, all rational thought flew out the window. I was consumed by an overwhelming need to not be alone with whatever those things were. I burst into our sleeping area, frantically shaking people awake. "Guys, you have to come see this," I hissed urgently. "There's something in the cafeteria, these glowing squares. I've never seen anything like it." Groggy and annoyed at being woken up, most of the group reluctantly followed me back to the cafeteria. Dr. Chen grabbed a flashlight, clearly skeptical of my wild claims. But as we filed into the room, an eerie hush fell over everyone. The squares were still there, continuing their mystifying rotation. "What the hell?" muttered Jake, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. "Is this some kind of prank?" demanded Allison. "Did you set this up somehow?" I shook my head emphatically. "No way. I just found them like this. I have no idea what they are or where they came from." Dr. Chen swept his flashlight beam across the room, searching for any hidden projectors or light sources. But the squares seemed unaffected, maintaining their steady glow and movement. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Chen said slowly, his scientific mind clearly struggling to make sense of the scene before us. "I've never encountered any natural phenomenon that could explain this." We all stood there transfixed for several long minutes, watching the hypnotic rotation of those ghostly squares. An atmosphere of unease settled over the group as the impossibility of what we were witnessing sank in. Eventually, Dr. Chen suggested we try to interact with or disrupt the lights somehow. Jake tentatively reached out to touch one as it passed by, but his hand went right through it with no resistance. The square didn't react at all, just continued on its path. Allison tried waving her arms to block the beams, but again there was no effect. It was as if these things existed on some other plane of reality, visible but untouchable. After about 20 minutes of observation and failed attempts at interaction, Dr. Chen decided we should leave the room and regroup. As we filed out, I noticed Emma lingering behind, still staring at the lights with an odd expression. "Emma, you coming?" I called. She gave a little start as if coming out of a trance, then hurried to join us. Back in our sleeping area, we tried to make sense of what we'd just experienced. That's when things got even weirder. As we compared notes, it became clear that we hadn't all seen the same thing. "Wait, what do you mean 9 squares?" asked Chris. "I only saw 4 of them." "4? There were definitely at least 6, argued May. "You guys are all crazy," Jake chimed in. It was just one long horizontal bar of light moving around the room. A heated debate broke out as we realized everyone seemed to have perceived the lights differently. Some saw squares, others saw circles or triangles. The number ranged from just one shape up to a dozen. Even the color wasn't consistent. While most agreed on a bluish-white glow, A few people described it as more of a pale green or yellow. Dr. Chen listened to all our conflicting accounts with growing bewilderment. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, scribbling furiously in a notebook. "Some kind of mass hallucination, perhaps? But what could have triggered it?" We tossed around theories late into the night. Someone suggested it might be related to the high altitude messing with our perception. Another wondered if we'd all been exposed to some weird toxin or gas left over in the old factory. But none of the explanations felt satisfactory. Dawn was breaking by the time we all finally drifted off to sleep. When we woke a few hours later, the obvious first move was to go check out the cafeteria again. But in the harsh light of day, there was no trace of the mysterious lights. The room looked completely ordinary, just a dusty old cafeteria with some broken tables and chairs. We spent that whole day distracted, eagerly waiting for nightfall so we could see if the phenomenon would repeat. But when darkness came, the cafeteria remained stubbornly empty and lightless. We took turns keeping watch all night, but the glowing shapes never reappeared. The next day, we reluctantly packed up to head home as our trip came to an end. As much as we all wanted to stay and investigate further, we had flights to catch and classes to get back to. Dr. Chen promised he would reach out to some colleagues to see if they had any insights into what we might have experienced. In the years since, I've replayed that night in my mind countless times. I've researched every kind of atmospheric phenomenon, optical illusion, and paranormal occurrence I could find. But I've never come across anything that matches what we saw in that abandoned factory cafeteria. Sometimes I wonder if it was all just an incredibly vivid shared dream. But then I'll catch up with one of my old classmates from the trip, and the conversation inevitably turns to those mysterious lights. The memory is still so clear, so viscerally real for all of us. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night. Part of me hopes that one day I'll find a rational explanation that makes sense of it all. But another part of me is oddly comforted by the mystery. It's a reminder that the world still holds secrets and wonders beyond our current understanding. All I know for certain is that for one brief, magical night, I glimpsed something truly inexplicable. Those 9 glowing squares, dancing their ethereal waltz across an empty room, opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before. Whatever they were, they left an indelible mark on my perception of reality. So I continue to search for answers, knowing I may never find them. But I'll always be grateful for that brush with the unknown, that moment when the veil of the ordinary world lifted just a bit, offering a tantalizing glimpse of something more. I was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old when it happened. It was one of those lazy summer afternoons in the Midwest, the kind where the air is thick and heavy and time seems to slow to a crawl. My cousin Jake and I were in the back seat of my mom's old station wagon, driving back from my grandparents' farm about an hour outside of town. We were bored out of our minds, as kids tend to be on long car rides, idly watching the endless cornfields and occasional farmhouse roll by outside the windows. I remember Jake had just finished telling some dumb joke that had us both giggling when suddenly he went quiet and his eyes got real wide. He was staring intently out the rear window of the car. I twisted around in my seat to see what he was looking at, and that's when I saw it too. At first I thought it was just a weird cloud formation or something, but as I kept looking, I realized it was way too big and solid to be a cloud. It was this massive black triangle, like something out of a sci-fi movie, just hanging there in the sky behind us. The thing must have been the size of a football field at least. I'd never seen anything like it before. "Mom!" I yelled, my voice cracking with excitement and fear. "Mom, look, what is that thing?" But she just glanced in the rearview mirror and said, "What thing, honey? I don't see anything unusual." Jake and I kept staring out the back window, completely transfixed. The triangle was moving now, descending slowly towards the ground at an angle. It looked like it was going to crash into the trees lining the road about a half-mile behind us. "It's falling!" Jake shouted. "It's gonna crash!" We watched in stunned silence as the giant black shape disappeared behind the tree line. For a split second, there was nothing. Then a bright green flash lit up the sky, so vivid it left spots dancing in my vision. "Did you see that?" I yelled to my mom. "The green light? Something crashed back there." But she just sighed and said, "Boys, I think you're letting your imaginations run wild. There's nothing back there but trees and farmland." Jake and I exchanged bewildered looks. How could she not have seen it? It was right there, plain as day. We begged her to turn around and go back to investigate, but she refused, saying we were already running late and needed to get home. The rest of the drive passed in a daze. Jake and I kept craning our necks to look out the back window, hoping to catch another glimpse of whatever it was we'd seen. But there was nothing, just the same old trees and fields and cloudy summer sky. When we got home, we immediately tried to tell my dad and older sister about what we'd seen, but they just laughed it off, saying we must have dozed off and had some kind of shared dream. No matter how much we insisted it was real, no one would believe us. That night, I barely slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive black triangle descending from the sky. I kept replaying the green flash over and over in my mind, wondering what it could have been. A crash, an explosion, some kind of weird alien technology. The possibilities were endless and terrifying. The next morning, Jake and I convinced my dad to drive us out to where we thought we'd seen the crash. We scoured the area for hours, looking for any sign of wreckage or strange markings, but we found nothing out of the ordinary. Just the same old cornfields and patches of woods we'd seen 100 times before. Over the next few weeks, we checked the local newspapers religiously, hoping to find some mention of a UFO sighting or an unexplained incident in the area. But there was nothing.